Welcome back. If we can find seats, this is the second panel of Corpus Delicti, Worship of Heavenly Bodies. I want to pass the mic now to Carlos Motta, the moderator, to introduce the panel. Please join me in welcoming Worship of Heavenly Bodies.
Thank you, Tavia. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It is really an honor to be able to serve as moderator for the panel that is about to begin, called Worship of Heavenly Bodies. I would be curious to hear from the organizers about the title of this panel. Maybe we can ask you a little bit later where it came from. But this panel, it promises to discuss how trans people and trans bodies are both governed and ungoverned by entrenched societal structures. Our panelists will cover how trans people live within and outside the medical and political industrial complexes through time, and how the radical spirit of individuals and communities persevere through these shifting political and societal landscapes. And our panelists are amazing. I've been reading about you. I mean, I knew a little bit about your work before, but it was really just last week when I was invited to serve in this role that I got to see the wide range of your work and practices, and it's really an honor to be able to be here and kind of lead a conversation to explore the different ways in which you have been working both artistically and politically to better the lives of trans people. Our first panelist is Sandy Stone. You have a program with a full bio, so if you would like to know more about Sandy Stone's life and achievements and work, please visit the program. Our second panelist is Hannah Perry. And last but not least, the wonderful Ceyenne Doroshow is also joining us. So in the Hannah's biography, when they were working at Karen Lord, I don't know if you wrote this, but it is the bio that exists on the site. There is a line at the end that I thought would be an interesting line to remember throughout the conversation. And it said, "Our systems have to change in order to accommodate the diverse needs of trans people." And I believe the promise of this panel is going to be to think about the work that has been done in terms of medical, political, and societal structures and how to respond to them, create new structures. But at the same time, I think the three of you have doing work that is experimental, boundary-pushing, artistic. And I thought that would be an interesting place to begin. So I wanted to begin with you, Sandy. When I was researching a little bit about your work yesterday, I found a really compelling interview with Susan Stryker. And you said in this interview, "I see in the new virtual worlds created by communication technologies the opportunity for a legitimization of some forms of multiplicity as well as transgender identity and other kinds of subjectivity that are stigmatized in the quote-unquote real world." And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because we are, of course, in a panel that frames and responds to the work of Arca. And I saw the performance on Wednesday and I was struck by precisely these lines, how Arca seems to be pushing a relationship between the construction of an identity through the mediation of artistic practice and technology. Perhaps creating new aesthetics, new forms of artistic practice, cyborg aesthetics, and ways of thinking about the body that are not necessarily framed by the conventions and norms that we are accustomed to. So I wanted to ask you to please, you've been around for a while and you've done so much. Could you please give us a little bit of a background in terms of what you have done, how you have been thinking about art and technology? What are the experiments that you can share with us that would be relevant in the context of the little framing I just did?
Oh boy. All right. Well, all right. Let me mention first that I'm trans. I transitioned back before there were any support groups or information or anything of that kind. So it was kind of a total exploration of what the hell is going on here. And I did a lot of that in the area called the Tenderloin in San Francisco, which is kind of a downscale area in which all of the queens of that time hung out and the sex workers hung out. So the milieu in which I found myself was interesting. And before that, I had actually lived here in New York, and I was involved in shit like inflatable domes on the tops of buildings on the Lower East Side, where we were doing 360-degree projections and 360-degree sound. But we're talking about a time when the Lower East Side meant something like post-war Beirut. It was bombed-out buildings and overturned cars and skeevy guys in long overcoats roasting dogs over flaming tubs of kerosene. So that's an interesting milieu in which to practice your practice, or maybe I could call it my art. So I started out there, and then I moved to the West Coast for the technical reason of being far away from my family. And when I got out there, I immediately began looking around for ways that I could transition. And of course, there was no information, there was nothing. There was only Christine Jorgensen, who was tall and thin and blonde and willowy and always liked to wear heavy makeup and high heels. And I'm short and dark and Jewish and hate high heels, and I can't figure out how I'm going to achieve this, which of course I never did. I'm still short, dark, and Jewish, and you know, here we are like 50 years later. So that didn't work. The only thing available at the time was the Medicine Society. And I called them and I said, the word transsexual was around because of Christine Jorgensen. And I called them and said, I think I'm transsexual. I think. Because at that point I was a mainstream rock and roll recording engineer, so I've got a long beard. I'm doing the male presentation really, really well. I've got a long beard. I'm wearing the denim work shirt, jeans, you know, the engineering boots, clomp. And I've got that really down. And the Medicine people go, well, we don't really know how to deal with your kind, but why don't you go talk to the police? Well, it turns out the police have this thing called the Transsexual Counseling Unit, which is actually one guy, Elliot Blackstone, in the Tenderloin doing outreach to the Tenderloin queens. And he doesn't really know anything about trans, but he has a big heart, and he really wants to help. So I go over there, and I meet my first trans woman. Never seen a sister before. She turns out later to be a psychotic murderer, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later. Meanwhile, Elliot says, well, you're really in the wrong place. We're really dealing with people who have fallen totally out of society. You haven't fallen out yet. So why don't you go over to the Center for Special Problems? Well, the Center for Special Problems is over at the other end of town in an entirely different world. And they are run by a woman who believes herself to be the only true transsexual on the West Coast. And she considers her job to be to show the rest of us up that we're not. So I go in looking for help. You know, I meet her. It's Angela Keys Douglas, by the way, was her name. And she looks me up and down and she says, so you think you're a transsexual? You know, well, take off all your clothes. So, all right, so I take off all my clothes. I'm standing there naked. I don't think about issues like consent or ethics or anything. And she goes, Margot, come in. And in comes this huge strapping guy. You know, he's got pecs from hell. He's naked to the waist. He looks like he's oiled up, you know, shaved head. She says, now I notice that there's a massage table in the room. And Angela says, Mongo, rub, you, pointing at me, lie down, You know, I lie down on the table, and Mongo begins to rub my back. Well, I love having my back rubbed. I don't know about you, but I'm having a really good time. This is a terrific pleasure. Oh, God, somebody rubbing my back. Great. Angela's looking on going, how does that feel? And I'm going, yeah, it feels great. This is not the answer she wants. It turns out she's trying to prove that I'm just a gay guy who kind of thinks I'm trans, and it's not working. I'm just having a good time there. I'm not responding right with my, you know, sexually, oh. So after a while, she gets disgusted. Mongo, leave. The Mongo goes out, get dressed, put my clothes on. Okay, so they decide to give me, thanks to, I have now passed, in some sense of the word, Angela's initial interview. Not that she thinks I'm trans, but that she couldn't discourage me. So they give me, the Center for Special Problems is willing to give me diethylstilbestrol. Anybody know what that is? DES? It's a drug that they gave to mothers in the 1930s, in the last century, to avoid miscarriage. All it does for a trans person is turn your nipples black, but it really turns them dead black, and you look like some kind of target. But that's all that happens. It also screws up your metabolism and everything else. And as a side datum, DES given to mothers in their first trimester can be statistically linked, we think, to an increase in the number of trans kids that those parents have. But we don't have enough for the right sigma on this. We can't actually turn out any good papers on it yet, but it's out there somewhere for whatever it's worth. So the Center for Special Problems mainly deals in drug people, you know, people who are on one sort of drug or another. So the way they give you your DES is they don't just give you a bottle of pills. They make you come in every day, and they give you a little paper cup with one pill in it, and a glass and a paper cup of water, and you have to take it in front of them. So this was my introduction to the world of estrogen, which DES is not. And from there, it was straight downhill until I am the person you see before you today. I'm omitting, like, you know, 50 or 60 years of weird shit here because we don't have enough time for it. But I wanted to tell you something about my background. From there, I somehow or other got involved with the body mod community. The people who were looking to Stellark for inspiration and who like to hang themselves up by meat hooks. And I became adopted into that community, although I never did suspensions. That was really Stellark's corner of the universe. But from there, I went to, well, I wouldn't call it from there. I did a series of experiments involving inhabiting the sensoria of cats, which is a fancy way of saying that I found a way to put electrodes into the hearing apparatus of cats and bring those electrodes out to little transmitters that they wore on their collars. And then I'd put the cats out in a field. We had a field of grass next to the NIH building at that time in Bethesda, Maryland. And I would put the cats out and let them run around in the field, and I'd go back into my lab and put on headphones and tune the cats in so that I could feel what it was like to walk through the grass and hunt mice. And I don't want to go into that in too much detail because it would take a while, but it was a hell of an experience, and you really get to inhabit what it's like to be a cat hunting mice in a field. So this is one example of the breakdown of the barriers, of the boundaries, or at least making the boundaries very, very porous between one sort of intelligence, awareness, sentience, if you will, and another, completely different one, from my view as a two-footed human to the cat's four-footed view where they really hear things that we can't hear. And I got to do that. So that was the beginning of crossing those boundaries of art and technology and the body and identity that I spent most of my time doing. And now my time's up, so you take it back.
Thank you, Sandy. Ceyenne, I wanted to bring you into the conversation because Sandy seems to be talking about structures, kind of like pre-trans discourse and structures, sorry about the 7 news.
Yeah.
And you are someone who has created structures for housing, for food security, for the lives, the respective lives of Black people. Could you speak about the relationship between how you hear Sandy's experience living in a world that didn't have any structures, that were being built through personal structure, and the present, where there is a discourse and a backlash to that discourse, and the work that you have done with GLITS and elsewhere, please?
Hi, everybody. I'm Ceyenne Doroshow, the founder of GLITSINC. The area Sandy's talking about, Tompkins Square Park and around there, back when I was a child and my parents would take us to St. Mark's, I would see, you know, people that looked like me. Yes, it was much like Beirut. It was insane, but it was also beautiful. It was queer as could be. It was homeless people. It was squatting, because that's what it was called. And before the city and gentrification took it over and ran us out. And fast forward, all these years, all these decades, we still were unhomed, unhoused, not going to the right medical providers. There were no medical providers that dealt with things like gender identity. Either you were gay or you were lesbian, and that was it. For me being a youth, identifying and knowing something's different. Something's different in me that's not either gay or lesbian, but actually going to the Gay and Lesbian Center because my school thought I needed therapy, and they sent me there. And being in that room of gay and lesbian people, the commentator or the person running the group said, well, there's something about you that's different. You're not either, you're a cross-dresser, but what I want you to do is sit over there. And when you sit over there, if you have a question and you want to participate, just raise your hand. But this group is for gays and lesbians. So you could imagine when I needed care and I needed direction, right there was my first sign of discrimination from my own. That's one of the first lessons I learned about being trans and me being so different that I wasn't even welcomed in my own community. And you look at the disparities still today. For in all the world of privilege, there's a lot of privilege now, so they think. We're not really privileged. People are just waking up to the fact that trans lives do matter. And that needs to be said because we're still being hunted. Black trans women are still being murdered. And it just sets the tone to say that we have not woken. We're not awake. And you look at healthcare, the way it has thrived. But you look at the infrastructure around healthcare for our community. Where is the infrastructure? Are you doing the right kind of analysis for healthcare? Is the disparities matching? Because if you're getting all this work done and you're getting surgery to be the best you, are you housed? I think those things go together. You could be as pretty as a butterfly, but if you don't have a home, how is that butterfly thriving? And society didn't see, and still don't see it that way. There are a lot of trans people living in shelters, living in SROs, which are single room occupancies. They are the scum of the earth. That is a system that feeds the system, and if you don't get yourself out of that system, you're gonna be stuck in that system. So how is that serving our marginalized communities? And then landlords that don't even care about you or who you are. It's your sexuality that may keep you away from the very thing you need, which is just housing. It's not meaning because you're trans, you're a bad person, but a landlord sees you as a problem, and they might be willing to take your money because they can get you out as soon as they get you in, and redo this cycle over again. So you look at all the progress we're living right now, where we're getting top surgeries, bottom surgeries, boobs, and you're getting all of this, and you're still hungry. You have no way to thrive, no way to survive, no way to gain access. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. So I created housing because I said I would. I was one of the people. When I bought Glitz building, I was being evicted. Nobody really knows this. I was being evicted out of my house that I rented for 3 years. When I rented this house, I gave the guy almost $70,000 for the 3 years. I wanted to pay my rent ahead of time because I did not want to be thrown out. So here's the lump sum. And within a couple of months, the roof had caved in the house, and he told me, it's yours, deal with it. So here I am, a renter. I had to pay thousands of dollars to fix this man's roof. Then the basement flooded, and I called him and I said, you gotta do something here. I paid you up front. And he said, well, you're a whore. This is exactly what he said to me. You know nothing about my background. He knew not I was a caseworker, that has served community, that I'm a human rights fighter, none of that. He just told me to deal with it. And I went to the city of New York, and here's the thing about all this coming together. When you go to these offices that are designed to hear our fights, the Commission of Human Rights is what? It's supposed to be there for all of us. But LGBTQIA, you're not in those rights because our stories are never heard. If they had a researcher and a researcher researched how many complaints of harassment against the landlord and medical facilities are from our community, you're not gonna get a clear answer because it's not our stories being documented or told. So I created Housing One because I'm gonna discriminate. Yes, it is all us. It looks like us. There are chandeliers and sparkles on the wall. There are gold ceilings in everybody's apartment because you need a little glitz in your life. It is the reflection of us. The door is purple. The fire escapes are hot lip pink. I made it as queer and gay and trans as possible because we have never had anything to ourselves. You look at Sage Housing in New York City, that's 50-50. You know what that means? 50% of that housing is cis people and 50% of that housing is LGBT community. How is that for us? I don't need Irma looking at me like I'm a problem in my Sage years because I'm living in that building and I got on fishnets. So how is that safe for us? So when I bought Glitz, it was because I said I would. I said if I ever had the access to get that kind of money, dumbest idea in the world, by the way, and a good idea. I didn't see the problems that would come behind owning a building and holding community. And what I seen as the huge problem was our people had never had anything like this. Everybody that I put in this building break me down emotionally because they call me crying, because it is peaceful, because it is beautiful, because nobody's chasing them. It's in a beautiful neighborhood. This is how you sustain and give our community the things. If you have a home, then you're able to look at healthcare and employment and sustainability and education. The building is low income, which means they may not have to ever move. I'm not ever throwing one of us out. But this is an opportunity to go to school and to thrive and to learn. And our systems don't do that. This world doesn't provide that. It took a black trans woman to get up and have the idea, oh my God, I could take care of my community in some kind of way. Can I afford this? Fuck no. Being very honest. It takes a lot to run a building, to hold people, to pay for oil, to pay for heat, to do all of this. But the happier side is the graduations, the people that are thriving, the community, trans women that are becoming nurses. We have 4 trans women going for their doctorates right now. That's the work. We have creators, we have children in Vogue magazine, Italian Vogue. This is a total right turn when the world is going left. So sustainability looks like medical care, housing, and just general love and respect for our community.
Thank you, Ken. And Hannah, you two have been working within the idea of creating structures for access to healthcare, but you're also an artist and a member of the collective KUNK. Could you please share your experience in working within creating structure, access, questions of representation, and then also your more experimental, artistic self?
Sure, yeah. It's interesting that I'm sitting between two of you because I feel like I have a foot in both worlds. In terms of kind of piggybacking off of what Ceyenne was talking about, without health, you have nothing, really, at the end of the day. It's everything. And I'm in a position right now where I'm caretaking for my mom and seeing her healthcare starting to kind of deteriorate, and how vulnerable you can be at any age when it comes to health problems, right? And that's just separate from trans identity and getting what you need around that. My work in the trans community was really more professional, I suppose. It wasn't so much coming from a personal promise to myself per se in the way that you've done it. I was an employee, actually I was working in queer and trans health for a while. I worked at Fenway Health in Boston doing research, and then moved over to Callan Lord for several years, and I was there doing work exclusively with the trans community as a case manager and a care coordinator. And then as I moved up into more of an administrative role, I started creating programming. And one of the things that I was noticing was that while there was a lot of really great programming and intention within the health clinic, once the state in 2015 mandated coverage for surgery and other kinds of healthcare access for people with Medicaid, tons and tons and tons of patients were starting to come to my door asking, how do I access this? But it's not just how do I get my foot in the door with a surgeon. You really have to think about all of the pieces that are important to making sure that you're going to heal well from the surgery. So we needed to think about, does the insurance company know what they're talking about? Is the patient prepared for the surgery? Do you know all of the different pieces of the surgery and what you're going to be encountering? How invasive is that? Are your medical providers who are providing your hormone therapy, do they know about surgeries? Do you have a safe home to live in? Are you living in a shelter or an SRO? How are you going to get yourself, how are you going to heal after surgery if your housing is insecure? So those were all things that I was dealing with as a case manager, and I was like, okay, we've got some problems here, because some of these surgeons, honestly, were snakes. And they were coming in when Medicaid became a line item in the state budget, and so they were just here for the money and were not prepared really to do certain procedures. I could call out hospitals, but I won't. And it was honestly a little dangerous, I'm not gonna lie. I think that people were really excited about the prospect of being able to kind of, in a way, move on with their lives by being able to access the specialized healthcare, but nobody was really prepared to give it to them. So the program that I started, it's called the Integrated Trans Health Program, but that included housing, navigation, and counseling for youth. But the biggest part of that is a surgery doula program, which you work with someone who's like a field-based case manager, essentially, for 12 weeks, up to 12 weeks. So the whole perioperative process from, I have a question about this surgery, to I'm healing from this surgery and what's next. So that person is field-based, meaning that they are visiting you at your home, going with you to doctor's appointments, and making sure that they're educating you about the procedure and then everything you need around it. Like, do you have enough money saved? Have you moved everything from the top shelf to the bottom? Have you moved everything from the bottom shelf to the top? Whatever it is that you need to kind of really be as prepared as possible. And that included working with directly with surgical teams and being like, hey, we actually need to talk to you. So we're going to meet monthly to have these discussions about the next cohort of patients that are coming in, to make sure that they're prepared, and if there's any problems that are coming up, that we can discuss it and be more in open communication with the medical team. So that's a huge project I'm not there anymore, but it's still going on and growing, and they're still really thriving. And it's really important because of those pieces of, not just, having a supportive family, but having supportive community. And, if you can't heal at home, who can you go to do that? And those were things that were really important. I just felt that, folks were missing some key pieces there. In terms of the through line with my artwork, everything was kind of simultaneous. I was working in healthcare, and everybody was, preparing me to get an MPH, which is a Master's of Public Health, and honestly, I thought it was boring, the classwork and everything, but I was really more inspired to do artwork. So I went to art school and learned a lot of different ways to kind of express myself that way. And I actually ran into Sandy's work as a result of that, because I was doing work with like multiple projections and trying to create an environment that took people out of their body in a way, and that's where a lot of my work came from. So what I like to do is basically documentary performance. So I interview people about their trans experiences, and it led me down a path to talk about out-of-body experiences and how a lot of people who are trans kind of have that strange experience where you're kind of watching yourself perform yourself in real life. It's, it was a common theme, so it developed into this larger project where I wanted people to feel almost unable to place themselves in that physical space. So I was, I did a piece at the Brooklyn Museum where I was projecting onto the floor from the ceiling and did some projection mapping and other stuff like that. So a lot of what you do was really inspirational to me, and I am really appreciative of the work that you've been doing around that. And what I like to do is basically take structures and then deconstruct it and do a lot of like non-linear kind of work. So that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from, and that's also in terms of the collective that I was with, Kunk. We did a lot of taking different resources, musical genres, current events, news, and mashing it all together into our own kind of sound and style. And a lot of us are, still out in the world kind of touring and that kind of thing, and other people have moved on into research and things like that, but it's all the same thing to me, that the work of building communities can also be an expression, right? And so I kind of do both, I suppose.
Thank you. I wanted to, maybe for all of you, but perhaps Andy, you have something to say about this, is to think about the limitless possibilities of imagination of constructing bodies through the interaction with technology and artistic practice. Which is something I saw very clearly in Arca's performance. There is like the merging with the machine, right? The constructing an identity that is not tied to the ways in which we think about binary identities, or even the political trans identity of political discourse. Can you speak about the kind of emancipation of the imagination when it comes to thinking about expanding what we understand to be a body?
Well, we had a shot at that. By the way, this stuff tends to come around every 30 years. You do it a little differently based upon what technology you have available at the time. What tech is cheap. When it was my turn in that barrel, the particular tech we had was internet and internet-related things, which is to say communication technologies in the large. So at that time, people were beginning to discover that you could project yourself out into the networks, and you could be in a network presenting yourself to another person, whatever you felt you were. You weren't limited by the fact that they could see you. But that kind of thing goes all the way back for our purposes. Let's take the beginning of electricity as the kind of the beginning of our period. We can talk about the telephone as the beginning of that. my research started with sex workers, and I was introduced to phone sex people actually by a trans woman, which was sort of tied everything together. And what I discovered about phone sex workers was that their job was to distill the idea of desire, of erotics, and therefore of body, because body is tied to erotics in one way or another. It's possible to escape from that, and it's really hard. They were distilling the idea of body. They were boiling it down into a little verbal token that they could send over a phone line, and then the person on the other end would take that little token and they would do the equivalent of putting it in boiling water and letting it expand. They would blow it up into an entire complicated representation of a body, of two bodies, of how they interacted, the way in which that foregrounded erotics, and eventually getting you really into the realm of pleasure. And this is like, we're talking like 60 years ago. I'm pretty old. And at that time, this was kind of cutting edge. Oh, the idea that we can do sex with phones. This is really, wow. Okay, so from there, then we got really basic things of the internet. You could do text. You couldn't do images, but you could do text, so you could describe yourself. And one of the things that we learned about, well, what are they called now? VCRs was what they were called then. Video recorders. One of the first things we learned about the video recording industry, which was about movies, was that what kept the entire industry afloat, awash in money, was not the movies. It was sex. It was porn. And porn video was taking off like crazy, but nobody wanted to talk about it. And that's still entirely true. The CD industry, the digital video industry, all that stuff looks like it's being kept afloat with Hollywood product or Bollywood product or films from any country about anything. But it's actually kept afloat by porn. So and that's where all the money is. So we're back to the idea of bodies and desire and representation. It's those three things. Can't get away from them. It's just a question of how you put them together. And what I want to leave you with is the idea that anybody can do this. Anybody can represent themselves through some communications media as whatever shape, form, identity they choose. And that's fun. That works really, really well, as long as you only get to do that through some communication media like the internet or video or phones or whatever you choose. But it doesn't ever get you away from the fact that you live in your own body, and that ultimately what you do is grounded in your own body and its brilliance and its desires and its pleasures and its pains and its suffering. And that's where we join together, that point where the body comes to ground and the fact that that's where you gotta live. So.
And then there is this the social body, Ceyenne, I think is something that became very, very visible in the March for Black Trans Lives in front of the Brooklyn Museum, right? When this thousand, I don't know exactly how many people were there, but it felt like hundreds of thousands.
25,000.
Exactly. When these 25,000 people came
people.
together.
They lied to me. They told me it would be 200, so I agreed. I agreed, and then they kept me up at the top of the museum so I would not see. And I knew the screams and the yells were getting a little loud. And I said, well, can I go take a peek? And they were like, Ceyenne, you don't want to see this yet. Because I would have got in the car and got the hell out of there. And a councilwoman came and grabbed my hand. It was like 5 minutes before I had to go and speak. And she said, hold my hand and walk with me. And when I tell you, I bawled. I thought I was going to faint. It was the most beautifulest thing I've seen. Like, the call to order was to wear white, and it was a sea of white. It was a sea of white right in the backyard where I was kicked out and thrown out. And it was horrible. But, you know, when we look at a call like that, a call to action, it is not to be taken lightly. The 25 years I was a case manager for trans women, I was devalued. My body was devalued. This work is devalued. The reason why I formed my own agency was to have agency, to have control over what I could do for my community and not what policies or politics tells me I could do. I write the policies, I write the politics, and how our community can sustain. So when you look at a march like that and you look at that, I raised that money in 3 days. I raised $2-point-something million in 3 days with the help of Queer Art. Rio Sophia believed in my leadership and believed that I could do this. So my promise to create housing was for sex workers to actually get their shit together, to be able to sustain the idea that tomorrow is promised, but it needs to be done by us. If we have housing, it needs to be created by us. If we have laws and bills, we need to be the ones on it, writing it. Otherwise, none of these systems work for us. If we're talking about our body as a whole, we need to be the ones to discuss whether we want abortions, whether we want sex changes, whether we deserve whatever we want with our minds, our bodies, and our souls.
Yes. I was informed we have 10 minutes, and I want to make sure that we have space for 10 minutes of questions from the audience, if there are any.
Oh, come on.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not scary.
Anything. What's your fantasy?
So my previous job while I was a case manager, because case managers don't get paid dick, I was a sex worker. I was a BDSM worker. And I did my work through the internet. And at the time when COVID kicked off, Sesta enforced 2 years prior to that, which is the bill that says you can't promote pornography or stuff online. So basically you removed all of that. You took away access for sex workers to promote, and mutual aid jumped up because of COVID. And it struck acknowledgement for the world to know that trans lives matter, but I got close to 10,000 death threats. There was a down and bad side to mutual aid, but I also bailed so many people out of Rikers Island through a bailout fund. I put people in Airbnbs because of mutual aid, so they went from the jail into sustainable housing. Some of them are still out and sustaining. Some of them went right back to jail. That's all they know. But the power of mutual aid it's a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword, because now you got to weed through what is actuality, who really needs help, or who just wants a nose job or good hair. And that's a problem. When you're trying to sustain a community, I always want to be transparent with everybody, and I think we all should when we're going into mutual aid. But we also realize not everybody's there.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day in terms of sustainability, like thinking about it more in terms of generational wealth, right? Because I don't think we think of ourselves of having generations as trans people, but we actually do. And how do we take care of ourselves when there are so many limitations in doing so? And that does mean, reaching out to, elected officials or whoever to make sure that policy reflects our needs, but of course, putting that in practice is a whole nother thing, and having that be like, okay, it's not just a 3-year grant. This is for a lifetime of people who need it. That's where we need to go, is finding a way to increase access so that people can be sustained for a lifetime and not just be reliant on those small gifts that we're giving ourselves. And that's really difficult.
Here's the thing. Can I retire? No. No. I won't be able to sustain if I retire. If I stop helping people, other people will die. So the reality is I'm going to be doing this work until the day I die, because somebody has to make a difference and do something with their body that changes something for somebody else's body. And that work needs to be done. It has to be done transparently. It has to be done with your heart first and then your mind. Otherwise, you're doing it for nothing.
Any other questions? We have about 5 minutes left. Yes, Tiamat.
Good afternoon. First, I just want to say thank you for putting on this forum. I think something like this is really important to have in our community. As a transsexual myself, I have been across the board as a straight person, bisexual person, a transgender person, and now I'm detransitioning because being a transgender woman didn't end up being what I thought it was going to be, or what I was told it was going to be, or what I envisioned it should be. It was just disappointing for me on a personal level. But I've seen a lot. I'm out there. I'm out there in the world. I myself have been attacked by people as a trans woman, but also primarily because I'm extremely modified. I am the most extremely modified person in the world. And I'm happy to be here because I would like to take whatever I learned here and with me to Los Angeles and share it and also, embrace it and live it. So, but the question I have is, this program is beautiful. I don't see anything like this happening in Los Angeles. Are there plans to maybe reach out to other communities across the United States or even around the world to do something like what we were doing here today?
I am international. I don't know about anybody else. But I'm in Amsterdam, London, Paris, Kenya, Uganda. I'm going to Bangkok Friday to fight for sex workers. I'm actually on the NSWP, which is the National Sex Worker Project. I'm on the board. I have these conversations all over the world. I cursed out Bill Clinton. I've had Hillary Clinton in my backyard. I'm that bitch.
Love it.
I believe you should always go to other cities and other states because the politics are different. And what I can say in New York, they need to hear in California.
Exactly.
They need to hear in Chicago.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Tiamat, I think Sandy has a resource for you.
In LA, there's the Los Angeles LGBT Center, which has a division called the Trans Lounge, which is specifically meant and funded to address these issues. And if you're interested, you can look them up. They're really well organized. They do a lot of good work.
I think that's fabulous, and I will most definitely be looking them at. One thing that concerns me that I have been seeing within the transgender community itself, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, some people might not like to hear this, but the transgender community the biggest problem the transgender community has is the transgender community. Because...
Oh my God, you're so right.
You know, I have been approached by trans women who, they know that I'm a trans, this is when I was identifying as a trans woman myself. Girls would come up to me and we would say hello, and immediately one of the first things they would say is, you need to get big boobs, that way you can be passable. That passable thing is
Do
just
you
something
hear my
that needs to be
voice?
thrown out the window.
Do you hear my voice?
Yes.
I'm stuck with this.
Yes.
But I identify as lady. Forget the pronouns and the rest of that
Exactly.
shit. Because that's what I am, a lady. But you hear my voice? It ain't never gonna change. This is it.
It has to
But
be
I'm
that
still
way.
a fishiest motherfucker out here.
I
So
love it.
don't worry about anybody, what their thoughts are. Your transition is your transition. Mine is mine. When somebody comes up to you and tells you what you should do, tell them to hold their breath. Just hold it. And when I see you tomorrow, I hope you're still holding your breath.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a really good place to end. Thank you, the three of you.